Hi everyone, my name's Antle. I'm a Mi'kmaq beadwork artist and the owner of Bunchberry Beadwork. And today we're going to learn how to make this beaded flower pin. So what you're going to need to get started is 2 pieces of leather. I'm using moose hide, and you're going to want to draw a flower on one of the pieces. You need 2 needles. I'm using size 9 Glover needles. You need some beading thread, some beads. I'm using size 10 seed beads, and a pin. So what we're going to do to get started is we're going to use this piece that has the flower drawn on it. And I'm going to take off a couple feet of thread. I'm going to thread my needle, and I'm going to put the needle halfway down through the thread. So in the middle of that thread that I just cut off, and I'm going to tie the 2 ends of that piece of thread together. So that gives me a double thread. And then I'm going to need to knot it at least 2 times at the end because we need a nice thick knot. So that is the first piece of thread that we're going to be using. And now we need another piece of thread, and that one we're not going to double, so it can just be half as long as the other one. The less thread you work with, the easier it is. So we don't need very much thread for this piece, so you can work with short pieces of thread. So then this next piece of thread, we're just going to thread it onto our needle, and we're going to tie another double knot at the end, just with one piece, because we're not doubling up this one. There we go. So we're going to move our single thread to the side for a moment, and we're going to start off with our double thread. So we've got the 2 ends tied together here, and 2 pieces are coming out of our needle. So we're going to come up through the back of our hide, and we're going to try and find the middle. And you can just kind of poke around until you come up in what you think is the right spot. And what we're doing is we're going to start with this middle yellow piece. So we're going to pull our thread all the way through so that our little knot brings up in the back. And then we're just going to put on 1 single bead. And then so we're going to put our needle back down just really closely to where we came up, just about like a millimeter next to it. And that's how we tie down our first bead. So then we're going to want to take the same needle again and come up just a little bit to the side of that bead, so not far off at all. And then we're going to do the second row of yellow beads around here. So I'm going to try 7 beads. It's always going to be different because these beads are not very uniform, so it's just trial and error. So this is my next row, and this is where I need to bring in my second string. So what I do is I lay these beads down where I want them to go, and then I take my other string and I come up through the back just on the outside of those beads. And what I'm doing is I'm tacking down this row of beads to keep them in place. So I'm coming up on one side of those beads, and I'm going down on the other side. And so my thread is going to go in between my beads. And I'm just going to tug it pretty tight to keep it in place. And then I'm gonna shape these beads a little bit more. And I usually go in between every second bead. So usually you do every bead every second or every third. In this case, I think every second is good enough. It'll keep it down tight. So then we come up on one side and go down on the other side. And this is the 2-needle applique method. So now I put my last couple beads in place, and so I need to tack them down. So I'm going to come up on one side, on the outside of those beads, and then I'm going to take my thread and put it over, go down, and then I'm tacking it down. And then so at the end here, I need to move this double thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to poke it down right next to where it already is and just try and hide that thread a little bit. And then so that's what I'm going to use for my center. You can make it as big or as little as you want. So you can see in this one here, I've got 4 rows of beads, but in this one here, I'm just going to do 2 because it's a little bit smaller. This one here is 3 rows. You can make it as big or as little as you want. But now the next step is to create these little lines in the middle here for the petals. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our double thread with our needle, so our needle that has the 2 threads coming out of it, and we're going to come up right down from one of our indents for our lines for the petals. So I'm going to take my needle and put it up right here, and I'm going to go as close to those yellow beads as I can get. Then I'm going to pull that all the way through. And then I'm going to start with my green beads because that's what my petals are going to be today. So it's going to be trial and error for how many beads you need, but you can just put on a couple and tack them down, and if it's not enough you can add some more. So I'm going to try this many, and then I'm going to tack them down with my single thread. So I'm just going to hold them in place there. Then I'm going to come up on one side with my needle in between the beads, and I'm going to go down on the other side. So it's the same method. We're just tacking down these beads to keep them in place. Now for the petals, where I'm only doing 1 row of beads here, I'm going to go in between every single bead. If you want, you can still do every second bead. It'll make things faster, but it might be a little bit looser, but that's fine if you're just learning. So just up on one side, down on the other, and you tack them all down. So this method is pretty repetitive, but that makes it easy to learn because it's one method that you're doing over and over again. So again, this is called the 2-needle applique method. There's also a 1-needle applique method. So now that I'm done tacking down these beads, I need to move this thread again because I need to come up and do my other rows. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through the hide as close to this last bead as I can get, so I can hide my thread. So I'm coming down, and now my thread is coming out the back, so I'm going to move it, and now I'm going to do this one. So I'm going to come up, and then I do this row here. So the method is the same, and you need to do it 4 more times. So when you do that 4 more times, this is what you get. So at this point, you can either bead around the edge, which is what's done in this flower, or we can go ahead and do the edging, which is what's done in this flower. So we're going to go ahead and do this one. So what we do here is we're going to get rid of one of our threads. So I'm going to get rid of my double thread. So I'm going to take a pair of scissors and cut that thread off. And then I'm going to tie it. So this is so that the beadwork doesn't come undone or loosen up. So I'm going to just tie it up and then cut off that extra thread. So now I need to cut out this shape. So I've got a pair of leather scissors here. Depends on what kind of leather you're using. This is really soft leather, so you could get away with really any regular pair of scissors. But you cut this out and you want to leave a bit of room, a couple millimeters from around where your marking is. So this is the front of our flower. And now we can take our second piece of leather. And what we're going to do is we're just going to lay this one on top of that second piece of leather. And we're going to trace it out. And then we're going to cut out this second piece of leather. So there's our second piece of leather. And at this point, you can add in your pin, or you can add in your pin later if you want. I like to cut little slices in my leather to put my pin in. Make sure your slice is big enough to fit through. So now we've got our pin in the back there. And now what we need to do is take a little bit of glue. I usually use E6000. And you put just a little bit on the back of your piece. Don't put it too close to the edge because we're beading the edge and we don't want to bead over the glue because we won't be able to get our needle through it. So then we put that down. And at this point you're going to want to trim. If your back piece is a little bit bigger, you can see where mine is. So you're just going to want to trim that to make them the exact same shape. So I've got one done here with the glue dry. So this is what it looks like when I evened up the front and the back. So now I've just got one single needle here, one single thread. That's all I need now. And so mine is coming out of the middle because I left the thread that I was already using. So I'm just going to bring it through to the front so that my thread is coming out through the top. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do this edging technique. So this is called wrap edging or lazy stitch. So we just wrap it all the way around. And this is the same method from start to finish now until the end. So again, you just test out how many beads you want. I'm gonna use 6. See how that looks. And then so you put your beads on and then you wrap it around the edge. And then you take your needle and you go in as close to your bead as possible. And then you want to come out just a millimeter or so to the left or right of the beads that you just put on. Then you're going to do it again. Try to use the same amount of beads every time so it's uniform. Then we wrap it around and go through the back and come out just a couple millimeters away from the last row. So this is the same method you do the entire way around. Now when you get to the end, your flower is going to look like this. And you're going to want to just slide your needle off and cut your thread so there's just a little bit left. And now I want to take my thread and when I put it through, put it as close to the beads as possible because I need to tie off my thread and I want to hide it. So you can see this is where my thread is tied off over here and this is where it's tied off right here. So I'm just trying to hide it within those beads. Now this is the back so you're not going to see it anyways, but it's still nice to hide it a little bit. So now all I have to do is just tie this string off. So I'm going to try and get that knot down as close to the hide as possible to keep my beadwork tight and make sure that my last row doesn't loosen up. So I will usually do this maybe 3 or 4 times just to make sure it's really secure. And then you cut off that extra bit of thread and you're done your beaded flower.